Is it a tiny house or a caravan? Let's have a look. Hi, I'm Rachel Heiser from Heiser Says, and welcome to another episode. I've got a stein of water. Last time I did a video, quite a few of you go, "Where's the stein?" It was there, it was on the counter, but I don't drink coffee like Florian, so I'll have to just fill it with water. So today I am doing a follow-up to a video that Florian did last week on tiny houses. He looked at an article where the Minister for Industry wants to increase investment in tiny houses. I think it's an area where we can get a lot of innovation, and Florian was quite critical of the modular industry. And I wanted to take another look at the tiny houses, and just an observation, but have you ever noticed that so many of these tiny houses are on wheels? They are all they're just basically caravans. They're all movable, they're all on a chassis. Often you'll see a number plate on the back and lights. They're caravans. And the reason why is because if it's a transportable caravan and licensed and registered as a caravan, it doesn't need to comply with building regulations. It falls under the regulations that deal with vehicles, and a caravan is typically for temporary accommodation. The legislation around caravans is to do with the safety on the road. It's to do with maximum transport heights and weights and loads, and how that box is going to handle itself on the road so that we don't have things flying off and causing accidents and the like. You find that when a caravan is being driven, no one's inside, it's empty. So they're not really that concerned about the occupant safety, and being temporary short-term intentions, then the regulations around that as a long-term permanent residence, they're just not there. So you'll find a lot of people are designing and building tiny homes and not having to comply with the same building regulations that everyone else does because it's a caravan. And if our federal Minister for Industry wants to invest in this sector, does she want to encourage long-term permanent residence in an unregulated industry? I'm a fan of the tiny house. I think there are some beautiful examples. And the reason why some of these examples are so beautiful and so tight and it works is because they're not compliant. Look here, you've got this stair going up into a loft bedroom. So here's the loft bedroom up there, and you're going up the stairs. So these stairs aren't compliant. They're too narrow. That needs to be 1 meter clear. It looks more like 700 to me. It's not compliant. Once you get over a meter in height, which would be about this, that's probably about a meter, give or take. Anything above that needs a balustrade. And that balustrade needs to have a 125 sphere, can't get through it. So that's basically the circumference of a baby's head. So if a baby crawled up those stairs, they couldn't fall out. And then this balustrade needs to be a meter high, and it wouldn't be far off, to be honest. But once again, because this is a caravan and not a house, it doesn't need to comply with the same rules as everyone else, which is why these structures are cheaper to build, because they don't have to build to the same standard. So do we want to, and on this side, that's basically an angled ladder. That is not a staircase going up to a second loft bedroom. And don't get me wrong, this is a beautiful little tiny house and I love it, but we're not playing fair if this is allowed as a bedroom for one group, and then if you build a standard house, this has to be 2.4 high. And then you've got your bathroom in here, composting toilet. So if you've got a composting toilet in a caravan, it's obviously intended to stay in that spot for a long time. The water is plumbed, it's connected to mains power. This is not a temporary dwelling. This is someone's permanent residence for a family. Just credit this, all these examples I'm showing you are from the YouTube channel Living Big in a Tiny House. I'm a bit of a fan of the channel, and I love the design, but coming at it from an architect's perspective, it's very easy to be very critical of the design of a lot of these tiny houses because they're not compliant. So here's another one. This one's in Victoria, and once again, this is it's on wheels. You can see it's on a chassis. This is a tiny house. It's movable, and look at the setting. This is in a rural property, and you'll find a lot of these are in rural properties because most inner city councils don't like caravans, and they have rules that you can't park them in some places, or you can only park them for a certain amount of time, or you have to be in a caravan park, then you've got to pay fees. So a lot of these are in rural settings, and look at this, look at all this scrub. Do you think this tiny house has been designed to comply with our bushfire regulations? So the bushfire regulations around housing, especially in areas within Victoria where we've had some recent fires, in New South Wales, it's all over the country, they're very onerous. And if you've got a standard house and you put it in a bushfire prone area, you're looking at about a 30% price increase because of the way it has to be designed, detailed and constructed. You can't have this in a standard house. You've got all this underfloor area which is exposed. It's all very open to ember attack. So with Australian trees, the bark, it will I'll just flick screens. Let's see if I can do this like Florian. So the bark, it gets it catches a light, and then that heat will start to curl, and it'll roll all the way up, and it'll cause this little spiraled, rolled up piece of bark, and in the middle will be a little ember, and that ember is burning through those layers of bark, and it'll get picked up by the wind and it'll fly away, and then those embers will then fall into a crevice, they'll fall into a crack, and they'll be protected from the wind, and then the ember will burn through the bark, and then it'll start burning the timber around it. And if you have enough of these embers, that's how houses burn down in bushfire areas. So when you're designing for a place like this, you need to be very conscious that a bushfire isn't necessarily a matter of what, but when are you going to get a bushfire? And have you designed the house, and is the house built to survive a bushfire? And I don't think this one is, because you get all these embers sitting in around this tyre. If that rubber catches a light, it's a bonfire. And this is a timber house. It'll go up in flames. You can have a timber house, but you have to be careful about how you design it. And once again, beautiful interior, but you've got a non-compliant staircase to a loft bedroom. At least this one's got some balustrading up there, but you know, you can fall through here. And once again, that completely open stair going up to another loft bedroom. This house is for a family of 4. So, and look, if this loft was furniture, then it wouldn't need to comply with it being a room, because furniture is temporary and removable. But being a built-in element in the space, it'd be very hard to say that, oh, this is a loft bed, it's furniture. It's built in, and it would be considered another level, at which point you then trigger a whole lot of building regulations saying it's not compliant. So moving forward, if our Minister for Industry wants to encourage this style of building and get the modular sector to go crazy, we need to have a good hard look at our building legislation. And I think one of two things need to happen. One, why don't we have a new building class? So we've got class 1 for just standard detached houses, and we've got class 10 for your garages and sheds. And why don't we have a class 11 for a small house and relax some of the rules? Why don't we relax some of the staircase rules? Why don't we relax ceiling height rules? And if you actually decided on having a new class of residential building for a tiny house, and you send that out into the wild, into the design community, it would go crazy. If you had a new class of building for a tiny house, and then councils were able to say, okay, on these particular lots you can build a tiny house, development would go crazy. Think of the profit if you're able to take a standard lot and divide it into 4 and sell 4 houses where you would not be allowed to subdivide otherwise. It'd go crazy. Everyone wants to make money. So, if there was the legislation in place to support this industry, then you would have the innovation. But just saying, oh, we want to invest in modular, you're not going to get the tiny house and these good examples that our Minister for Innovation wants. It's just going to be, that's why these houses are caravans, because they don't have the same level of requirement, and therefore they're much cheaper to build. The other thing is, because they're caravans, you can't get a mortgage to build one of these. You're not going to get a mortgage to pay off over 30 years. You have to have the cash to build it yourself, to either pay for it to be built or go own a builder. So a lot of these are owner builder. This one is a good example where if the owner is really concerned about a particular issue, they'll design for it. So this is designed for bushfire. It's got fire retardant paint on the outside. There are shutters that go over the windows. You can see the bottom is concealed, so there's no ember attack. The external is detailed quite well. But then you go inside and you've got a curtain over the shower. The composting toilet I'll show you. It's behind this wall. It's directly next to the kitchen. So that's a huge problem for contamination of your cooking with the toilet being so close. There is only one sink, so it doesn't comply. If this was a house, you would have to have a minimum of 3 sinks. You need to have a kitchen sink, a basin for hand washing, and a laundry sink. You can't have 2, you can't have 1, you have to have 3. So the legislation that's in place for our housing, like, you're not allowed to have a ladder unless this was considered furniture. Now, due to its really lightweight frame, you could probably consider that bunk bed to be furniture, but you'd struggle to justify this loft bed with a staircase as furniture. So if there was another building type, or even some relaxed regulations around our housing, then this could be an area where we could see innovation. And once again, you've got the other problem where people are building the caravan, like this one. It's got wheels underneath and a chassis. It's all enclosed, but they're meeting most of the building regulations, but they're not meeting the transport regulations. This is far, far higher than your maximum transportable height. And so this particular dwelling, you wouldn't be able to take on the road because it's too tall. You wouldn't be able to go under any underpass, and you just couldn't take it on the road. It's too high. So you've got this dwelling that is not completely compliant with building regulations, although it's probably 90% there. There's only a few issues with this one. You can see the whole bottom is completely enclosed. The deck is tightly spaced. You've got no room around these architraves for ember attack. This one is designed for bushfire, which is good considering its location. I listened to the talk about this one, and apparently this was a site for a that was severely damaged by bushfire, so they're right onto it. But look at that balustrade. That's not compliant. You know, a child could fall through that very easily. That staircase is incredibly steep. You can't build that narrow and that steep in a typical house. And that ceiling height above the loft floor it's too low. So beautiful house, but not compliant. And this one, believe it or not, probably is. So you can get some compliant examples because it's got these pop-outs and everything's on the one level. There's no lofts, and they've got an outhouse for their toilet. So you can get compliant examples, but the majority of these, if they are on a chassis, then the reasoning for that is to get away from building regulations, because the majority of these are parked in one spot and they're not going anywhere. So what can we do? This is an example of a granny flat, and it's in a Sydney backyard where the owners were living in the original house and decided they wanted to rent out their house and live in a granny flat so that they could pay off the mortgage. Great idea. So they've split the backyard in two. They built a pool and the granny flat, and they're a family of 4. So they've got 3 tiers for the children, and this is considered furniture. So this is a completely compliant example. So those stairs going to the bunk bed is furniture. This bunk bed is furniture. Compliant bathroom, correct number of sinks. This is the master bedroom, proper ceiling heights. It's compliant and considered furniture. So, but this is not modular construction. This is in situ construction built for the place, and it would be very tight construction. All of the materials would have to come down through this garden path to be built down here. So this is not cheap to build. Then we've got another granny flat, once again in Sydney, the parents' house built in the backyard for a family of 2. So you've got 2 bedrooms and living in the middle, and its outlook is looking away from the main house for privacy. You've got another example built in situ. So you can see all of these examples that are fully compliant, none of them have the loft spaces. They are all single level. This one is terraced. And so you can see this is an example of a container house. But the issue we've got with container houses is if they're done on the dodge, a few years ago a couple died. We don't want to see examples like this where people die in these houses. They cooked inside and had the door closed, and a shipping container is airtight, and they suffocated and died overnight in their sleep. So you really want to, like, this is not a great example, but if you leave it open, people will build to the minimum, and they died. This is why we have these standards. So, and another example I wanted to show is on the Gold Coast, where the tiny house is going mainstream, and I think the tiny house could be a great way to densify our cities without having to go up. This was one residential lot with one house on it, and they've split it up into 10 individual freehold lots, and each of these and it looks, Florian doesn't like it. He thinks it looks a bit patchwork, but it's on purpose because every 3 or 4 meters is another dwelling, and it's on a separate title, and they're individual freehold lots. It's terrace housing. Going back to the terrace house. And I've got another article on that one with some nice pictures. So you can see the terrace house. It's 3 levels, 2 bedroom. It's the space of a tandem car park. But once again, you can see that the owner of this one, what she's done is it said it's a 2 bedroom, 2 bathrooms, and I've added a mezzanine to it. This space up here where she's got her own home office is not a compliant space. And so she has had to add the ladder and the balustrade after she's moved in, after the builders have walked away, after it's got its certificates, because this is not a legal space. Which I think is a real shame. If you want to see innovation, this is the first place I'd look. It's an easy target. So your room heights, you can have 2/3 of a room that's less than habitable height, which is 2.4, and you can see these 2 spaces. It doesn't have to all be under 2.4. Your kitchen can be down to 2.1, but if you have to do this for tiny houses, so look at the width of this stair. It's 1 meter wide. Your stairs need to have that 125 sphere can't fit through a stair. Your maximum height for your riser, you're looking at 190 mil. That's not very high. And you've got to have barriers from 1 meter high so people don't fall off. And you can't have, if you've got over a 4 meter drop, you can't have it climbable. So your bathrooms, if you have the door swinging in, you need to have clear space around it. This is just not going to work in a tiny house. You don't have the room. You have to swing your doors out. And you have to have your toilet separated from your kitchen so you don't get sick. And if not, you have to have mechanical ventilation. And your windows. I love this one. This one's quite a new regulation, that windows in bedrooms, if there's over a 2 meter drop, you can't have the window opening more than 125 mil, or you have to put crim safe in. And that's to stop kids on bunk beds or just on normal beds climbing out the window and falling out. And I can see why it's there, but all of this regulation is pushing people away from standard housing and into caravans, because every time you add a new rule, you're adding new cost. So we've either got to do something to reduce our costs of construction so that people can afford to build their own houses, or we need to accept the fact that a portion of society is going to be living in a caravan. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.